Hey 3DMJers, this is Andrea Valdez, and you're listening to the 3D Muscle Journey podcast. This is our 210th episode, and it's extra special for a couple of reasons. The first is that, just like we always do every 10th episode, this is an audience-supplied Q&A session where we do our best to answer as many of your questions as possible. And second is that this was actually recorded live and in person with all three of the guys in the same room, which rarely gets to happen. We took some of these asks from our Instagram story replies and others from our case study Q&A form, which is always linked in the bottom of all of our monthly newsletters. Today, the guys will be rotating who does the asking amongst themselves, so you'll get both Q's and A's from coaches Brad Loomis and Jeff Alberts and our registered dietitian Steve Taylor. Topics covered in this episode will include whether or not the coaches ever think someone doesn't have a chance at competing, what to do when some lifts are progressing and others are not, how to manage a season when shows are 16 weeks apart, the essential pieces of equipment needed for a bodybuilding home gym, handling athletes with gynecomastia, how to program 48-hour refeeds, and lastly, if the coaches ever get paranoid that doing less will result in potentially worse results, despite logic telling them otherwise. As always, if you have any feedback or comments on this particular episode, let us know over on our YouTube channel at youtube.com/team3dmj and leave it under podcast number 210. So let's get into it. Here is Q&A session 21 with Steve Taylor, Brad Loomis, and Jeff Alberts.
Does anyone ever come to you for coaching and you think you don't have a chance of getting on stage?
Not really, to be honest. I think everybody has an opportunity to get on stage. Because if you think about it, yes, we're competing against other people, but really, it's cliche. We're competing against ourselves. So the way I kind of see it is you're your own canvas. So if you put the work in, whether, you're the top three or you're at the bottom, it's still your best ever. And the way I kind of see it too is like if you're trying to improve your physique thereafter, it's like a nice, you get clarity with where you're at. It's like a benchmark to see, kind of how you stack up to maybe other people. But, you can see what you're doing right, see what you're doing wrong, and you can continue to build on it. And it's like the 3D muscle journey, right? Like we're all trying to better ourselves in the process. And I think it gives people purpose too. Like if you have a goal like that, like to try to attain something that's a little bit more extreme. I don't know about you, Steve, like when you compete, you have like more hyper focus on something. You have more purpose. You put more effort into it. And how can you not improve if you do that? So I think sometimes like you might feel like you may not fit in, but how do you know if you're never really challenging yourself? So I always like to, if people have that question, like if you're thinking about competing, then you never know until you actually do it. So I always try to encourage people to actually put that first foot forward.
People are their own stopping points. And what I mean by that is that if I had an application come across my desk and the person was 5'6" and 280 pounds, and they wanted to compete, I would say, yeah, you got a chance to do it. It's going to take time. We're going to have to make sure, that we give you plenty of time, establish habits, all that kind of stuff. The only time a person has no chance of getting on stage is because they basically can't or won't do what it is that they need to do. They're their own stopping point. So, I need them to, do certain things and be able to execute certain protocols. And if they don't do it, then, they're not going to get what it is that they want, basically. They're their own limitation. So if there's a chance that somebody can't get on the stage, usually that's where they're not going to be able to make it. And even then, everybody wants to get on stage jacked and shredded and have a chance at a win. And that is where the stopping point is going to be. The person that wants to get jacked and shredded and win, they may not be able to do what it takes to be jacked and shredded and contend for a win, you know.
A lot of that's come from insecurity, right? Would you guys agree?
Insecurity.
As far as like the question, it's like, do you guys think I'm good enough to do this? That's like a kind of an insecure base from like where that question is starting from. I've had athletes that they're like genetic freaks, like they've never even competed before, but they're just like already come to us with like a ton of muscle, and they're like, yeah, this guy can do really well on stage, but they're insecure because they don't know where they're at because they've never been exposed to competing. So I've had people that are just genetically blessed, hard workers, but they think they're not where they are. They think they're actually less than where they're at. And I've even had to encourage people who are genetically gifted to actually take that first step to compete. So it's really, I think it comes down to like whether we're jacked or not. Like you kind of have to have that confidence level. And I don't want to be that coach like from the beginning says, this guy just not genetically blessed. Let's not even challenge him. You know, that's to me, it's like push. Like someone might just need a good push to actually do it.
Yeah.
And then, you know, you go through the entire process, you know, whether it's a 6-month prep, 8-month prep or whatever, you come out the other side, regardless of, you know, if you placed well or not. I mean, you learn so much about yourself by actually putting that effort level in. You go, wow, I actually accomplished something. And if I can do this, what else can I do outside of the sport? So, you know, I think it's always better to be positive and encouraging versus like kind of seeing someone like maybe, I don't know how well this person's going to do, and kind of just give them some feedback that maybe just doesn't even allow them to actually take that first step.
Yeah, because almost never will I get a fresh application, new person right in front of me and say they have no chance of getting on stage. Never. I mean, have you ever thought that? Like a fresh application, they want to get on stage. Have you ever been like, there's no chance?
No.
I've never had that. I have never thought that ever. But I can say that I've worked with somebody for a while and I know what it is that they want. And a lot of times it's what they want on the bodybuilding stage. And I've said to myself, they ain't going to get it. They're not going to get what it is that they want doing what they're doing. You know what I mean? Or not following protocols or not taking care of business, taking care of their own business. You know what I mean? So, yeah, that's kind of a long way to answer what seems like a simple question. But, yeah, I've never looked at a fresh application, a brand new person, and said they got no chance, ever.
I mean, I'm a realist, too. Like, you know, I can recognize talent level.
Mm-hmm.
Like, I can recognize someone who maybe doesn't have a lot of muscle, or maybe they have a lot of body fat to lose, or a combination of the two, and say, okay, you know, yes, you can do this. I have confidence that we can do this. But like you said earlier, it might take a little while longer. Like we have to do big picture game planning to make this happen successfully. I think a lot of times too, like if you're not making that big picture setup properly and it takes a turn for the worse, I mean, think of like the confidence level at that point. You make too many wrong turns. So I think it's super important to game plan that and just be real with people. Like, you know, we're experienced. Like I've been doing this thing for like since the early 90s. So I've seen a lot of bodybuilders. I know what kind of the levels people are at. It's like you have to be real with them. Like, okay, if you're expecting to be, you know, you want to go close to, you know, becoming pro or what have you, it might be a 10-year project. But there's levels. You know, it's not like your first time out, you have to go into an open division. It's like, you know, maybe if it's a teen, hey, we're starting at teens, or if it's juniors, novice, and kind of work your way up from there.
Yeah.
And it's easy for this sport. Like we get caught up in trying to be like too many steps ahead. And tripping over our own feet. It's like just slow down, you know, appreciate where you're at now, recognize where you're at now, and build on it.
Yeah. Yeah. And sometimes you just have to work harder. You think, you're like, I know it's going to be hard, but sometimes it's going to be harder than you think it is. And you have to work harder in order to get what it is that you're after, or whatever it is that you want. It's going to take twice as much work as you thought, or it's going to be twice as hard. But again, people are their own limitations. I've had people in great shape that I'm encouraging them to get on stage, and they didn't fit the mold that they wanted. You know?
When I was in my
and they don't get on stage.
Yeah, when I didn't get pro cards. I was in my late 30s, and I had done 20-something shows, And I just remember prior to that, like maybe early 2000s, I was like maybe 30-ish, somewhere in there. Like I didn't have like 100% confidence that I can actually turn pro. But then once I started kind of looking at these shows, I'm looking at all these people, I'm like, well, if they can do it, why can't I? Like what makes me not special like them? Like you said, okay, let me have belief in myself. Let me work hard, put the work in, and see what happens. Took a little while, but I eventually got it. So again, if you have someone who maybe is not as gifted or something like that, you be real with them. Like, okay, this is your level. Potentially, this could be your level, but you have to put the work to make that step.
I want to know what you think.
Yeah, I'm trying to
We're
think.
talking too much. It's
Well, it's good stuff. I'm trying to think like as
it's that right there. What is that? Pepsi Max?
It's that mango
No.
flavor.
Mango flavored, zero sugar.
I was trying to think of like as a team, like when do we typically like, discourage it? Because like you guys were saying, like it's not like anyone can. It just might not be the time. And like typically, it's like the only times we really like kind of steer someone away for it who reaches out to compete is if they're not in the headspace to compete. Like if they're kind of stuck in some disordered eating behaviors and they're not in the right like headspace to compete at that time. It's kind of like, not that they can never do it, but just now is not the time. It's like you're saying, like it might be extending the timeline for when they can compete, but they could still potentially do it in the future.
It's not that they don't have a chance of getting back on stage, or if they have a lot of red flags and have never been on stage, it's not that there's no chance that they can't get on stage. It's just not now.
Yeah.
It's going to be a long-term project.
Yeah, because I
So-
think we think about like this person can get on stage. It's like physically, yes. Okay, yes, you can train, you can diet, you can do all these things, but like the behavior side of things or the psychological side of things,
The anxiety around food
like
and
that, like if there's red flags around that, and the way to kind of find that out is to like ask questions, like one-on-one with an individual to find out like what the context is around this person's, the way they do things, their environment. So there can be some red flags there as far as like maybe some relationship issues or financial issues, because this sport's pretty expensive to do. Like, financially it can be a strain. So if there's like some red flags there, so like maybe it's just not the time now, but it could be later. But all these other things need to be maybe worked on first. Like maybe that's the priority versus like I need to add 5 pounds of muscle on my frame. Because most people, even with some of the stuff that I'm talking about, they're still kind of training anyways. They're going to the gym 2, 3, 4, 5 times a week. So you still have opportunity to build muscle. It's more so like this stuff internally might need to be worked on a little bit more so.
Yeah, because like, we would never, like if somebody was struggling with like binging and purging, we would never start them on a prep.
No, that would be like...
So it's like, because that happens sometimes, they'll be struggling with something like that, but they'll be wanting to prep at the same time. And so that's a situation where now's not the time.
Yeah. I feel like we answered the heck out of that. I am training for hypertrophy and able to make progress on a monthly basis. About 4 months ago, I hit a plateau and wasn't able to progress on 3 of my 4 chest exercises. I added 2 sets, getting my weekly chest volume from 12 to 14 sets, and it allowed 2 of those 3 to continue to progress. However, there is still that 4th chest exercise, the bench press, for 6 to 10 reps that I am not able to add load to. I assume that my volume is adequate for chest hypertrophy to occur. So what could be causing that bench press plateau?
There could be a few factors maybe. I mean, it's the 4th exercise in line, right? So I'm assuming the volume's coming prior to that, the increase in volume. Maybe just the fact that you're just fatigued. So it's just hard to, increase that lift. So the way I kind of think of it is like, if I'm like this person saying like, I think it's enough for hypertrophy for his chest, then it's just resetting a baseline is all. Because now there's more fatigue now. So now the baseline for that 4th exercise kind of went from here now to here. But it doesn't mean there's not going to be a stimulus. So over time, you might get maybe 2.5 pounds to it, maybe another rep or 2. So the baseline might go up a little bit. It might go down again, up again. But over time, maybe this person just needs to let it see how it goes another month, 2 months, 3 months, and see if you actually get a little bit of increase. But I kind of just look at those things as like just resetting baselines. Anytime you make an adjustment, that baseline kind of just resets. And then from there, you try to progress it. But that's not something I would be overly concerned with. Because even if, let's say, the first 3 exercises, you're getting a lot of stimulus from that, those are moving up a little bit, then you're still going to get plenty of mechanical tension on that 4th one. You might even get even more mechanical tension because you're that much more fatigued. So even though the load's not moving, it might feel harder, because the muscle doesn't know numbers. So maybe it felt like it was 100 pounds in real time, but maybe it feels like 110. So that's not something I'll be overly concerned with.
I'd love to hear what you guys see, but I know personally and with my clients, very, very rarely is somebody progressing on every single lift in their program at the same time, even when they're in a really good flow. Rarely. So I know, again, I'd love to hear your thoughts, but it's like, I'm kind of see it as like if somebody's progressing on 50% of their lifts, things are going well. Like if I look at the program as a whole and if like 50% they're adding either weight or reps to, then it's like we're in a good flow. I don't know if you guys kind of have a line that's kind of like, where that's like good progress if you're progressing on half.
That's excellent progress.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Because the overall volume is going up.
Because I think it's misleading. I think it seems like we should be progressing on every single lift all the time. But like that's just, I don't really ever,
especially with most of the clients that we work with, they're not newbies anymore. Yeah. Yeah. And I totally agree with you, because the way that I read this, first of all, question mentions hypertrophy several times. I'm training for hypertrophy. Later on, volume is adequate for chest hypertrophy, and if 3 of the 4 exercises are progressing, the chest is progressing. There's
a stimulus.
Exactly. The stimulus is there. The chest is progressing, So, I mean,
if you think about it, you can rearrange the order of that. And then now the exercise that was second, now let's say it's 4th, I almost guarantee that one's going to be diminishing. But what's not mentioned either is like, what are the chest exercises? Where's the mind muscle connection on that with this individual? Things like that. Like there's a lot of context that's taken into consideration. It's not just about the load.
Well, and again, I'm not the person's chest is progressing with hypertrophy if 3 of the 4 lifts are moving, just like you said. The program itself is progressing, and so therefore you're progressing. I could easily make that bench press go up, but it's probably going to mean that I'm going to have to take away some volume elsewhere and prioritize that bench press a little bit, and your bench press might go up, but you might not get the hypertrophy anymore, So to me, first of all, I wouldn't change a thing. I would just keep running with this, because if your goal is hypertrophy, I mean, are you concerned if your bench press is not progressing as long as your chest is growing?
Especially if it's 4th in line.
Exactly. Yeah.
If I really wanted my bench to move, like I'd move it up in order.
Exactly. Put it in the front.
And I would put maybe some fluffier, less invasive exercise, easier exercises down below.
Yeah. Yeah.
Another thing to take into consideration too, like we don't know what his rest times are or her rest times are. Is it a minute? Is it 30 seconds? Like maybe extending out your rest times, get a little bit more acute recovery. Maybe your performance can elevate because of that.
Yeah. Yeah.
Or maybe the other. So this is we can layer this forever, right?
Yeah. You're getting programming now.
So now we're going programming. So maybe before this workout, like take an extra rest day before. Make sure you're well fed. Maybe your performance elevates because you have better recovery going into the session. And then we got to think about, okay, what's the sessions prior to it? Are those progressing? If they are maybe those are generating too much fatigue. You're not getting the recovery. So there's a lot of moving parts here, and it's not a lot of these answers. They're not going to be clear cut, black or white. Yeah. But it's like you got to constantly be assessing like what's going on and questioning like the whys.
And just for me, it's like we want our cake and eat it too. We want to have the chest hypertrophy,
I like cake.
And well, we all do. But you know what? You're dieting. You can't have the cake.
Flexible dieting, I can fit some chocolate cake in my macros, Brad. I'll just wash it down with the Diet Coke.
There you go. You know, we're going to have to do something to get that bench press to go up. You know, we're going to have to be flexible in our approach. But
why don't we just change that to like dumbbell press? So if this person is like, it sounds like more, it's like messing with the brain, like just change the movement. Like, let's get rid of bench. Let's put in dumbbell press. You're resetting. New baseline. Let's see if you can progress that one.
Mm-hmm. Or like you said, just move it to the front. New baseline.
And what if the dumbbell press, actually they connect better on that? Better mind-muscle connection. It feels better. Maybe there's more mechanical tension because of that. So there's to me, it's just, we can stress on this till we're blue in the face, but there's just so many different ways to approach this and look at it.
Especially considering that the goal is hypertrophy. Hypertrophy. They mentioned that like several times, you know.
Or
and that's a program that's
here's another one, Brad. So if you're worried, okay, I can't get my load up, right, on this fourth exercise, add a set to that one.
Mm-hmm.
You know? So instead of like, let's say if you're, okay, I'm hitting 200 pounds every single session for the same number of reps, add another set in there. Maybe it won't break the bank. Maybe you're going to get more mechanical tension, more reps, more volume in there. Maybe it helps you progress. Mm-hmm. So there's different ways to kind of go about that. But I think a lot of times, like, you know, we kind of get caught in these little small details that if you think about it, it's probably just splitting hairs. So...
Yeah, and like I keep saying, you know, your goal is hypertrophy. You're fine. Just keep going. Don't try to mess up that's working because you want your bench press to go up.
Mm-hmm.
and so, like you were saying, Jeff, if you wanted to get your bench to go up in this situation, you would move it to the top of the line, and then you would accept that maybe the third or fourth chest exercise would not progress. You would just accept that.
In the current order, like let's say, I don't know, maybe they're doing a fly on the second one, and now you're moving it, you know, down below. Bench comes up, that fly goes to the left. Expect that one to go down, but you're resetting the baseline. So I mean, and if you're really concerned too, another way to go about it is like, let me just change my order every single time and get the best of both worlds. But then there becomes like a lot of moving parts, because how do you assess like overall progress with that? Because there's like, you're constantly changing things. It depends on the individual. Some people are stressed because they can't move a lift. Like sometimes you just change it, because you're still going to get a stimulus if you think about it. It doesn't matter what exercise you're doing or the order. If you're hitting, like depending on your rep range and the proximity of failure, if it's appropriate, you're going to get a stimulus regardless.
Yeah, I feel like we hit this. I don't want to like go back because there's so much we could talk about with programming. Like I really want to open that door. It's like I feel like, you know, because I know like personally, like what I'll do is like I'll just put in another exercise. Something stuck, I'll put in something else to let those muscles rest. You know, like chest back,
yeah.
whatever. But again, I don't think this is to get like deep into programming. But I think
we offer like a few scenarios and a few different things they could experiment with to see. How would you manage a diet with shows that are 16 weeks apart?
This happens to us quite a bit, actually. And the way that I manage it is come to grips with the fact that you're not going to be able to grind for that 16 weeks, especially if you're already really lean and you've already done one or two shows and you've done pretty well with. Come to grips with that, but really come up with a good diet periodization. So this is how I do it. 16 weeks is a perfect round number. If we split that 16 weeks into four-week blocks, we can go, okay, we diet for 3 weeks, we diet break for a week. We diet for 3 weeks, we diet break for a week. That's 16
diet
weeks.
Break meaning just kind of maintenance, right?
And I'll talk about that because there's a few different ways you can do that. One of my favorite ways to diet break is, okay, this week here, we're no longer in a deficit. And I can calculate that a jillion different ways. But the easiest way to have the client execute that so they don't have to change a bunch of habits, high day, low day, high day, low day, high day, low day, high day, and then back on it. And so I'll basically tell them that is the plan that we're going to run. Now, we're going to be married to it? No. Or will we adjust it? Maybe. But it's very easy to say, okay, 16 weeks is a long time. How am I going to get through this? I've got your plan right here, or maybe we have some more weight to lose. So maybe what we'll end up doing is we'll do this in 2 different segments. We've got an 8-week segment to where maybe we diet for 7 weeks, having 1 high day in each of those 7 weeks. The 8th week, we go high day, low day, high day, low day, high day, or all maintenance days, or some other way of diet break. And then if we're where we want to be, then we can kind of split that last 8 weeks into what I was just talking about. But a lot of times I'll when I split that up, a quote unquote digging week is our normal routine. 5 low days, 2 high days, 6 low days, 1 high day, whatever it is. And then get to that diet break. Like I said, my favorite's the high day, low day, high day, low day, because you don't have to change habits. It's just you're getting the same habits and now you're doing them every other day. But, you could easily just go maintenance days all week if you wanted to go that route. Or you could go 4 high days, 3 low days. You could do it a lot of ways. But I like to have a plan in place and then adjust accordingly and then kind of
so proactive,
set it
have
into
a plan, and then be reactive based on kind of what the experience is.
Mm-hmm.
In 2019, I made the mistake because I competed at Muscle Mayhem in July. And you remember I basically wasn't like all the way dialed in there. So it's like, okay, keep dieting, because the ultimate goal was Worlds in November. So it's basically about the same amount of length that the question was asking. And the mistake I made was I just kept digging, and I scheduled too many like shows in between. Not that the shows weren't important, but they weren't like the goal. So it was almost a distraction from the like what you're talking about, like that big picture game plan of kind of following that. It was more like, okay, I have these other little mini goals here, and it just kept me too hyper focused of digging, dig, and by the time I got to the end, my body was done. It was fatigued. It was flat. It was actually the worst look. It was the most important show, but it was the worst I looked out of the season. So I think what you're saying is it's important. You kind of have to know where you're at, in between, like once you start that gap, like where are you at? Are you all the way dialed in already? Are you very close to it, or you still have a ways to go? Because if you have a ways to go, it's almost like you could kind of keep doing what you're doing to a certain extent. Yeah. And then once you get to that point where it's like, okay, you're really on the cusp of maybe like starting to diet away some tissue, that's where like the diet breaks and managing the fatigue, like you're kind of talking about, comes into play. So that's, it's more about having that big picture game plan and making sure that you're being reactive.
Yeah. I like to structure it so that I'm not introducing something new, because that can be stressful. So that's part of the plan as well.
So as far, let's look kind of, sorry, I don't mean to interject here, but as far as getting to, because they're talking about like, in a sense, you do a show, then you got to try to either hold condition or keep improving conditioning 4 months later. So if you kind of walk that back, like setting up someone's prep and goals, like what I've learned from 2019 with myself and even with some other athletes from the past, like I try not to like have that type of trajectory in the first place. So if someone's goal is, let's say, at Worlds, which is we know kind of comes towards the end of the year, then it's kind of trying to find shows that are maybe a little closer to it. So maybe like
even further
that month, maybe month or 2 month window. So that way, you can be a little more conservative with the lead up, because you know how hard it is. If you're pretty lean, you got to try to like either hold it or improve on it for 4 months. Like 4 months is a long time.
Yeah.
So yeah, you factor in you're living in that environment, that deprived environment for quite a long time. And it's a strain not only on your body and just you in general, but it's a strain on people around you, a strain on how you function and with your jobs and that type of thing. So I think it's, walking things all the way back to the start, like how are we going to set this prep up? Is that an ideal scenario? And that's what I learned from myself was like 2019, as much fun as I had doing all those shows, like if I really want to look my best the part, then I needed to kind of change my setup overall.
Yeah. With your 2019 prep, it was kind of fun to watch you navigate as things popped up. Because literally,
it was everything was way too reactionary. I was like, travel to Mexico City, come back, and I got sick on
Yeah.
the, and holding myself on the plane for 4 hours, and then trying to manage like being sick, and I got a show a week later.
Yeah.
It's just
You didn't even know you were going to Mexico City until like what 2-3 weeks before or something like that.
Yeah, I mean, it was
just popped up.
It was an awesome trip. It was a great experience. I don't regret this season at all.
Yeah.
But
It was
definitely
difficult
hard
to
on
navigate.
my body.
Yeah.
And it was just my ultimate goal. It was like a little bit of a letdown because I knew it was like, okay, I didn't really fulfill my potential in a way.
I mean, I could add something, but it's because I don't prep people for shows like you guys, but I do work with a decent amount of people who want to lose 80 plus pounds, 36 plus kilos. And I have a similar approach. Like when someone has a good chunk of weight they want to lose like that, it typically is not just one gigantic fat loss phase. Like we might have a long fat loss phase, 6+ months with weeks off in there that are maintenance weeks. But then I'll also a lot of times do like 4 to 8 week maintenance phases.
Yeah.
If somebody's going to be dieting has that much that they want to lose, like I said, it might be 6 to 8 months of a fat loss phase with weeks off in there at maintenance, and then maybe a 1 to 2 month longer maintenance phase at the end of that to like give them a break, or if like they're going through the holiday season, they got a bunch of trips coming up.
I was just going to ask you that. So you kind of like, in a way, like we look at the shows, right? Do you look at like, okay, there's these holidays, there's these birthdays, these anniversaries, like maybe those are like the points in time where it's like, okay, that's where we back off. So it's not just about giving your body the break and all that, but it's also like accounting for real life stuff where they could actually enjoy those type of outings maybe a little bit more.
That's exactly what it is. It's like I'll look at, because a lot of people will go on 2-week trips, or like they'll have something for work where it'll be like 2 months are just going to be wild, and versus us just trying to like diet and do all this stuff for these 2 months. It's like our whole thing is trying to develop these habits that they can sustain for the rest of their life. And so it's like, hey, if we already just lost 40, 50 pounds or 20-ish kilos, like that's already a good chunk of weight. Like we can just chill for 2 months. You can go through all this stressful stuff and just practice maintaining. This way you get practice at maintenance. And so we can even like get away from tracking for a couple of months, recharge, refresh, and then get back after it once those like 1 or 2 months are over.
Yeah, because at some point they're going to get to the goal.
Yep.
And then it's like, okay, once you're at the goal, again, those maintenance periods come in handy because now you have to maintain that weight, hopefully, for their lifetime, right?
And now they've already practiced maintaining it, which is super cool.
Yeah. So it's the same principles, really. Even though it's not competitive bodybuilding, it's the same principles, which is really cool.
Instead of shows, like you said, it's life events.
Mm-hmm.
Hey 3DMJers, Andrea Valdez here to tell you about our new merch store at 3dmusclejourney.com/apparel. We scrapped our old clothing site because it turns out you guys wanted a whole lot more different options, so we figured out a way to make it happen. Now that we've created a new store through Redbubble, you can pick any one of over 50 various items, pick that item's color when it's available, and select one of our 5 logo designs for a custom piece of 3DMJ merch made just for you. There are multiple t-shirt cuts, hats, bags, hoodies, phone cases, pillows, tank tops, masks, stickers, kids clothing, pet accessories, and more. Just visit 3dmusclejourney.com/apparel or click the link in our show notes to head straight to the store and get yourself some custom-made 3D swag. Thanks for being a listener and enjoy the rest of the show.
What are your essential pieces of equipment for starting a bodybuilding home gym?
Gotta have a rack, right? I think that's kind of the one main piece that you could be very functional with. And it doesn't have to be a fancy one, just a rack, a bench, barbell, weights. That's what I kind of started with. But it doesn't even need to be that if you think about it. Like a pair of dumbbells, you can do almost any movement. And we've learned through, our good buddy Eric Helms that, depending on the rep ranges we train in, as long as the intensity is where it needs to be, you can create hypertrophy. And I think too, Steve, if Eric, the historian, right? Like he goes and shows us all these old timers, the pre-steroid era, like late 1800s, early 1900s, like all these jack dudes, and they got like limited equipment and limited knowledge. So the gains can definitely be made. So that's like what I kind of think about, like when you start a home gym, like it doesn't have to be fancy out the gates. What's your thoughts?
I get this question a lot, and I'm sure you do too, because we both train at home.
Mhm.
And, I always like a lot of our answers. I'm like, okay, it depends because, what's your budget?
Yeah.
What's
How
your
much
level?
space do you have?
How much space do you have? Exactly. All that is important context. But, I think if we're thinking minimalist, I don't have a lot of space, I don't have a lot of money, and I am just basically, they said starting their bodybuilding journey, I'll tell them a lot of times, I'm like, let's just get a variety of dumbbells, or if you've got the money, adjustable dumbbells,
Yeah.
and then get a utility bench, preferably something that is adjustable.
Right.
But I mean, it doesn't have to be, And I mean that you could spend 6 months with that, just developing the skill of lifting and training certain body parts, just using dumbbells and a utility bench, right? And so that's one way that I answer that question when I get
That's
asked
space
that.
saving and low budget.
Yes. Now, like you said, if you have the budget for it and you have the space for it, yeah, let's hold off on the dumbbells and let's get the rack and the barbell. Because if we got the rack and the barbell and the weights, now we've got a little bit more variety. We've got a little bit more
You have
appropriate loading.
Let's get you have more loading capabilities
Exactly.
at that point.
Exactly. Yeah. And really, that's kind of a setup that's probably a little bit more ideal with somebody that has had some years of training in them already. And we do need to appropriately load so that we get the effort that we, that we need. But yeah, I've even had folks like the COVID era when gyms were closed. We had to get really creative. Some people.
I told everybody. I remember when it hit, I sent a mass email to all my athletes, and I said, "Get yourself a pair of adjustable dumbbells, and a weight vest, and a bench."
Yeah.
Because if you have that, then like I say, you can hit almost every angle, like every exercise pattern you can do with dumbbells and a weight vest or what have you.
And having a bench.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It might not be pleasant on some exercises, like split squats. Everybody hated split squats.
Everybody was split squats.
But I mean, it's better than the alternative, which is not training at all. So
yeah, exactly. So
but when I started my home gym, it was just the rack. I had the barbell and the bench. And I must have trained with that for probably the first 6 months to a year. And then I added adjustable dumbbells to it. The guy gave me a lot of versatility, and it was space saving. Because my first home gym, it was like 9 feet by 11. So I had to keep it really tight. Yeah. And then once I kind of got more space, and I was like, okay, let me add a leg press so I don't have to, do squat patterns all the time. And then it was like, let me get a seated, leg extension, leg curl, a row machine, things like that. So I started adding pieces, not because it's essential. It was more like just because it added more variety and I have more, flexibility to do things.
Yeah.
More practicality is probably a good word to use.
Because the way that I went about doing it is very similar to yours. I got the rack given to me, and I had a couple of dumbbells, But a lot of times they'll get a very simple rack. They might just get, the stands just to start with,
Yeah.
And if they've got the stands, and they've got like a utility bench, they can squat, they can bench, they can row, they can military press, And so if you're kind of thinking, okay, let's start with that as kind of the foundation. I kind of feel like the next thing that you want to try to get is some way of being able to do a vertical pull down. So if you can do pull-ups, a pull-up bar is going to be kind of maybe the next thing that you go to, or having a way of doing pull-ups and chin-ups and things like that. And then you're pretty complete, and you can start thinking about doing things like we talked about, getting dumbbells, changing up your exercises a little bit more, having that more repertoire, and being able to do have the variety that you want.
And you get creative too.
Oh, for
like
sure.
When you're limited, you kind of get creative. You find different ways to incorporate, different exercises. But I think what's important too is that even if you're on a limited budget, don't settle for like super cheap equipment, because it's going to end up breaking and you're going to end up spending more money later. So it's like I'd rather just like save a little, like wait and save a little money and then buy something with a little bit better quality. Because the way I kind of look at it too is like I've been in a home gym now since 2004, 18 years, and you factor in gym memberships, gas to and from the gym, and then you factor in the time I'm saving, by not driving and all that. Like it's probably the best investment I've made as far as like investing in like a home gym.
Yeah.
So it doesn't have to be elaborate, but I think it's like whatever your budget is, I would definitely look for like the best quality, and that's just researching, because I get that question a lot too, Brad. It's like, what should I get? It's like, do some research, what as far as like what your gym space is, what your budget is, like we talked about earlier. I've had some athletes that had a pretty elaborate budget for home gyms, and I'm like, I have no idea, because I've never
Where
really
do you
had to
start?
I
Yeah.
never really didn't I never had a any
An unlimited budget.
yeah,
Yeah.
like I don't have that luxury.
Yeah. Yeah.
So-
I was thinking about it because like just going through COVID, like I trained at home and a lot of my clients trained at home, and you mentioned the vertical pulls. And I know your rack has a pulley.
Yeah, it has a vertical
you
pulley.
have a vertical pulley as well. So it's like if somebody, since it's kind of like, it sounds like they don't have a home gym that they'd like to build one. Do you guys like your vertical pulleys that are built into the racks? Would you recommend racks that have a built-in vertical pulley like that? Is it worth it, or are they kind of jank and they don't really work that well?
Well, I've been on YouTube and I've seen like, people go down to Home Depot or Lowe's and they, buy those little pulleys and they rig it up to their racks. And to me, it kind of looks janky. So I would definitely prefer it to be on my rack. And I've had my rack like 18 years now, and the cables they haven't broke or frayed or anything like that. So, I mean, but I've had a couple of athletes that have had like they created their own pulley systems, and they even kind of said it's like it's okay, gets the job done. So I mean, if that's all you have, though, you make do of it.
Yeah, because the hard part with because they even have those kind of makeshift ones that you can buy and hook it to your barbell in the very top.
Yeah, that's what I'm
of the
talking
rack,
about. Like I've seen people go to Home Depot, Lowe's, get some parts, and they do it themselves.
Exactly. And it works, but you have to do it really, really light. You have to have really lightweight, do a lot of repetitions with it. And so you can't get too aggressive with it. But Steve, to answer your question, again, it's just all about budget. If you've got the budget for it, absolutely get that rack that's got the built-in pull down pulley and the low one, because a lot of times it's both. You don't just get one or the other. Get that in there. But if you don't, we can figure it out. You're going to have to do a lot of horizontal pulling to train your back for a while, but we can figure it out. And if you can't do pull-ups, say you do have a pull-up bar that fits in a door frame or something like that, well, maybe if your budget's limited, the next cheapest thing that you can get is some bands so that you can do assisted, pull-ups on a pull-up bar or something like that by hooking your feet in the bands, and we can get a vertical pull down that way. But
most people are like, when they have home gyms, it's kind of like, I think it's like they don't have a lot of space.
Exactly.
So I think like when you kind of research equipment, you kind of think of like equipment that's versatile. I'm not sure what Eric has. I can't remember the name of the equipment system, but it's like you can do a plethora of exercises on that thing, and it doesn't take up a lot of space. So it's like, think of like efficiency. You want to try to save space, and try to get a lot of bang for your buck as far as variety.
Yeah, because his has the pulleys as well, right? The high and the low pulleys.
And they move. Yeah, you can bring the top one down and then the bottom one up, and they swing in, they swing out. Yeah. And you're right, Jeff. It doesn't take up a whole lot of space, but at the same time, some people don't have that kind of a budget. So that's all the things that I take into consideration as well.
I've trained with a 5-gallon water jug. And it was effective.
We all remember that.
I went on vacation and I used a 5-gallon water jug. So I just, like if I'm curling, okay, I'm only going to fill it up maybe a third of the way. If I'm doing overhead press, maybe I can do it half of the way. If I'm doing split squats, I'm going to fill it almost all the way. I mean, of course, I'm not saying people should go out and buy a 5-gallon water jug and train, but what I'm saying is weight is weight. Weight is weight. Gravity is gravity. If you have, the desire, dedication, Discipline, desire. You can make it happen.
Yeah, it was a 5-gallon water jug underneath the dining room table.
Well, I mean, we went to Mexico for a vacation, and the gym I was supposed to train at, they wanted to charge me like X amount of dollars per day. It was kind of far away, and I was like, it's just gonna get in the way of the family vacation. Take 2 hours of my day.
Yeah.
And I just happened to go in the kitchen, open the pantry door, and there's this water jug there, and it just went, aha! I can use that thing.
How that came
I can
about.
use that thing in the mornings, and that's what I would do. I just trained with that thing. So, split squats, overhead presses with it, curls. I did push-ups for chest. Yeah, did close grip push-ups for triceps.
And you got underneath the dining room table.
I was doing inverted rows on the dining room table, you know, and just made sure the effort level was high.
Yeah.
Split squats sucked, but, make do. It was only a week, so it wasn't that bad.
Yeah.
I didn't lose muscle. That was good. Yeah.
Okay, last one. So you're saying a rack could work, some good dumbbells could work, some pulleys or a pull-up bar. Anything else for those who have the budget? If you had to add one other piece of equipment to a home gym, anything else that?
Like personally, I really wanted like either a leg press or a hack squat or a combination of the two, and that's why I bought the combo that I did as far as a leg press hack squat, because it's just like for me like getting under a squat bar, or I have a Smith machine combo, like getting under that and just doing the squatting patterns was starting to beat me up a little bit too much. So just having that like really kind of helped as far as my hips, my low back. So it just gave me more options. Yeah.
Yeah, and that's I've thought a lot about what I would get, as the next edition of my gym. And really it will ultimately boil down to what is it that I need the most. And like you, I kind of fear the same thing. Am I always going to be able to squat? And leg extensions and leg curls, they're fine, but I want to have that complete program with a compound movement in it. And, I kind of have always thought, well, I think eventually I'll have to get me a leg press, But yeah, that's a hard question because it just depends on your needs, So
What about you, Steve?
Home gym?
Yeah, you got the barbell, you got the squat rack, you got the bench, you got some dumbbells, you got the kind of like the quote unquote like the basics, right? But what's that one piece of equipment that you're just like, okay, I have to have this to make my training like feel really good? What is it? The ab wheel?
That's a great question.
The shake weight.
I don't know. I mean, really, like the dumbbells would get me far, but it'd be weird. But I honestly might say a calf raise. It would probably be if I was actually no. It would be a leg press because that feels way better for me than a squat. But I didn't want to say the same answer, so it's like it'd be a leg press. But if not that. Bet it'd be a leg press because I could do calf.
You could do calves on the leg press. Exactly.
So
that's what I was thinking.
Press.
Cool. So the shake weight. Got it.
Yep.
Okay.
How do you feel with athletes who have gyno? Is it common or is it really just chest fat?
I think it's depends. I think it's both. I think people have gyno and they obviously have chest fat because I have plenty of chest fat that I do not like. And I mentioned this on another podcast and I just don't like it. It's my pet peeve. I'm insecure about it. But if someone comes to me with this question and they kind of want to know let's say if they think it is gyno, I'm not going to diagnose that. I'm going to refer them like, hey, you might want to talk to your physician about that and, maybe see what they have to say about it. And that'll give maybe a little bit more clarity as far as if there's something they might want to do something about it or not. But as far as chest fat, obviously we can do something about that. We can grow more muscle and lose body fat to improve the looks of it. But that's what my thoughts would be on it.
Yeah, I mean, I second what he said.
Yeah, I also have some chest fat. I'm not nearly as self-conscious as you, but I mean, really, to be honest with you, I don't really know. I mean, outside of course, obvious cases, right? I don't really even know what gyno looks like, nor have I had a client that I know of that I can think of that had gyno. So I don't really know like the evolution of gyno as it changes.
Yeah, I
You
don't
know
have
what I
enough
mean?
education on it, so that's why I think it's always best to like
Get the
refer out to a
diagnosis.
professional.
Yeah.
And, you know, a medical doctor is probably going to know best, and they'll be able to give them probably far better guidance than a bodybuilding coach would.
Yeah. And that's ultimately, that is what you're going to have to do eventually. You're going to have to do that. I mean, yeah, maybe we can find out, you know, through losing body fat, building some muscle. Does it look better? You know, was it indeed just chest fat or saggy muscle or whatever, you know? And then if you're still not happy with how it looks, you're going to have to eventually just kind of bite the bullet and go get an official diagnosis and have them figure out the best way to deal with that.
I think that makes the most sense.
Yeah.
How do you program 48-hour refeeds? Do you base your numbers off of their daily maintenance calories or their weekly maintenance calories? Brad,
Ooh,
since you're
wow.
really good at programming.
Yeah, and I love my numbers, right?
Right.
Yeah, because there's a couple different ways to look at it. Because it says, do you base their numbers off of their daily maintenance? So, yeah, I'm going to probably provide some context here. So if we're talking weekly maintenance calories and you want to program a 48-hour refeed with the same weekly calories, it really kind of comes down to simple arithmetic. If you've got 17,000 calories per week that a person is dieting on, and you want to give them a 48-hour refeed while staying in those 17,000 calories, you're going to have to make, 2 days 2,500, which is 5,000, and then take the other 12,000 and spread them amongst the other 5 days. It kind of boils down to just basically arithmetic. But do they want the daily maintenance on the refeed days? So are they having like all the days of deficit and they want to have the 2 days at maintenance? That would work. But really, to be honest with you, when I program a 48-hour refeed, I kind of want calories to go up a little bit. And when I say calories, I mean weekly calories. So let's say that I'm converting from 1 high day a week to 2 high days. A lot of times the reason I'm doing that is because, the 1 high day is not cutting it anymore.
Cutting it as far as like
the rate of loss that we that we wanted, actually I take that back. Scratch that. It's not cutting it anymore because the person's starving, they're under recovered.
I'll say the fatigue
is mounting. Yeah, that's what I mean by not cutting it. And we've got to give them, more time in a surplus or at maintenance or whatever. Weekly calories are going to have to go up a little bit. And a lot of times I want them to do that because your body's not going to know really if the weekly calories go up 300.
Because technically after 5 low days, right, they've been
in a deficit.
They're below the baseline, right? They're in
Yes.
a deficit. So having 2 days, even if it's above like technical maintenance, it's still not going to be, depending on how high you program them. But if they're not like excessively high, it's going to bring them up enough to where it kind of fights that fatigue off, but doesn't prevent you from losing any, body fat. Like you're still going to lose the body fat.
Exactly. Because a lot of times if you're in a deficit, first of all, you don't know the exact deficit. A lot of times we think we do, but the rate of loss is sometimes going to be the same, whether it's a 3,500 calorie a week deficit or a 3,000 calorie a week deficit. And so if I'm watching things click off 17,000 calories a week with 1 high day and 6 low days, and I now want them to get 2 high days, I'll say, okay, I'm going to give them two high days, rearrange the calories, and I'm going to let the weekly calories come up 200 to 300. Because, there's not a lot of times any difference between 17,000 and 17,400 calories a week. But man, those 2 high days that you can get an additional 200 calories on, they can really be a game changer for how you're recovering. you're not feeling as deprived. You're not starving for so long.
So in a sense, you're kind of setting up, like you're being proactive. You're setting up the game plan. If it's 5 low, 2 high, maybe those 2 high are technically a little above the weekly maintenance.
Correct.
Right?
Correct.
That's just to help mitigate those 5 low days where, naturally as those 5 days go on, the fatigue in theory is going to kind of escalate up.
Right. Mm-hmm.
So those refeeds kind of help bring that fatigue down. You're still getting the fat loss. Mm-hmm. You're kind of recovering, and then you're able to continue another week at it. Mm-hmm. What happens if, let's say, you like this individual, they don't, let's say, recover. Like they're just, after the 2 refeeds, they're still like dragging ass. Like, do you kind of just say, okay, just go back to those same low days anyways, because you're still getting the fat loss, and then maybe the following weekend or following 2 refeeds rather, you're just like, okay, I'm going to go a little higher on calories, or do you say maybe that you throw in a third high day? Like, how do you kind of determine that?
Yeah, and see, that's where it gets kind of fun, because a deficit is a deficit, and there's a timeline that we have to kind of pay attention to as well. But sometimes your body doesn't know if it's in a 3,500 calorie deficit for the week, or if it's in a 2,800 calorie a day. 2,800 calorie a week deficit, right? And so if you've kind of gone from 3,500 to 3,500 calories for the week deficit to 3,300, right? You've got room to throw a third day in there. Or you can kind of go for you can extend it out even further. You can have 1 low day and then get another high day in there, because now you've got 3 out of 4 are high days.
Yeah, because it doesn't always have to be 6 low, 1 high, or 5 low, 2 high. It could be 4 and 3. It could be 7 and 2. Mm-hmm. It could be 9 and 4. Like it could, and again, I think it comes down to to being reactive, right? Mm-hmm. Like you kind of see how these people are responding, because I think sometimes we're proactive. Like the numbers make sense, but we're not robots.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, coaches or clients, and sometimes I will purposely pull a person out of the amount of deficit that I've got them programmed in. Mm-hmm. I'll purposely say, okay, well, you know what? Here for a couple of weeks, we're going to be in a deficit, but it's not going to be 3,500 calories anymore. It's going to be 1,000. Yeah. And sometimes the weight loss slows down, but you know what? Sometimes it actually gets sped up too. And that's why I'm not too. I used to be paranoid about changing that deficit, and reducing it, because I wanted to stay on my timelines. But like we talk about with training, it's the stimulus, it's the sets and the effort. It's the deficit. Keep in a deficit, and if 1 day is a surplus, and the deficit is still present in some way, shape, or form for the week, you're good. You're fine.
How many times too, like when we're assessing the loss, right? And if let's say it's not there, it could be being masked. Because the fatigue is so escalated. Now we're like, there's the water retention. So you could still be losing fat even though the scale's not really showing it.
Yeah.
So sometimes like having like even more than two refeeds, or even higher refeeds, like kind of brings that overall stress level down. Then all of a sudden, like you go back on the low days, 1 or 2 days, and all of a sudden you get this whoosh, and that scale just all of a sudden plummets. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So like sometimes it's good to be proactive and like schedule these perfect numbers and try to pay attention to the scale and trying to hit these, specific rate of loss, but you have to take like all these other factors into play. Mm-hmm. So
and us being bodybuilding coaches, you got to look at what the pictures are doing too.
Yeah, I was just gonna say it's because like it's not just the numbers. It's like kind of like art.
Yeah.
In a sense, and it's like, well, how do you know? Like sometimes just you don't know. You try to make an educated guess. You run it and you assess it. Mm-hmm. Did it do what you wanted to do? Yes, great. Then it works. You can apply it again. Or if it didn't, well, maybe there's another adjustment you can make. Mm-hmm. I think sometimes we get too caught up in trying to be proactive and want the answers ahead of time, when sometimes you just have to just go through it and assess it, whether it's good or bad, and learn from it.
Yeah, yeah. Because
I don't want to hear from this guy. He's over here like,
are you chomping at the bit?
Well, I've just been thinking.
Yeah, because
he's like, damn it, I'm hungry. Give me 3 refeeds.
Because almost never do I program strictly by the numbers anymore. I almost never do that because, like you just talked about with fluid retention, if a person is not losing weight, but I can see that they're getting leaner, there's fat that's being burned there because I can see it. I can now see hamstring splits, or I can see striations in the delts. And so I don't care what the scale is saying at that point. They're holding on to fluids, whatever those fluids are, or if they're holding on to inflammation or something that's masking their fat loss, and sometimes the opposite happens. Sometimes I'm seeing the scale is going up and there's not evident fat coming on their body, but it's not looking good. They're getting soft and blurry, you know what I mean? And that's not fat going on, that's fluid.
So we've also visually have seen athletes get leaner, right? And it's, when you see a new low weigh-in, you're like, oh, cool. They look leaner, but it's not always the best look. Even though the scale's down, they look leaner. They just look flat, maybe a little watery. And then you give them that 2 or 3 refeeds, and all of a sudden that scale jumps up a decent amount, but yet they look far superior. They actually maybe even look a little bit leaner. So I think sometimes when we're making these assessments, like we pay attention to the scale a little too much. And you're always going to look, and most of the time, like when you hit those new lows, it's like you're in a depleted state. So I think the refeeds, like you said, Brad, they probably do need to be like maybe a little higher than maybe you think. Because I've heard like some athletes come to us and they've had their refeeds, maybe like only 100 calories more than their low days, and I'm like, 100 calories is like
a speed bump.
It's like 1 or 2 pieces of bread. Like that's not a ton of food to like really kind of fight off like 5 or 6 low days in a row, like all that fatigue. So sometimes it needs to be a little bit more abundant to kind of mitigate stress and fatigue and those types of things.
Yeah, Brad, I like where you started that, because it depends on, I like the way you put that. You're like, it depends on kind of what the goal for the week is. You're like, sometimes I want the calories to go up. Like I'm not trying to maintain that same deficit. Because I know, like for me, I like the 5-2 split, like a 5 lower days, 2 higher days, just because it works well for a lot of people's life. So when I'm first setting up a fat loss phase, I will pull from those 5 lower days to create 2 higher days to have that deficit. But let's say it's like farther along into a fat loss phase, and the person's feeling like their energy's super low and they're struggling, and I'm asking them questions like, what's your posture like during the day? Are you sitting down more? Are you doing this stuff? And I want to see what happens if I actually add in more calories to see if I can get them burning more calories because they have more energy
to move, sit up straight, stand instead of
So I like the way you put that. Depends on kind of the goal for the week.
And it's even though I'm very numbers oriented, I almost never base decisions strictly on the numbers. I like to see what their step count is. I really like to see, it's a pain for the client, but I really like to see what they're doing in the week, kind of when was this training, day done, and what did you do on this day and whatnot. And then kind of the I want to say the final point, the nail in the coffin, what are you going to say, is the pictures. What do the pictures look like? Or if it's everything is the same, then I'm going to have to maintain the deficit and rearrange things using arithmetic so I get the 2 high days that I want, the 5 low days, and the deficit's maintained. And things are going to change, but it's going to evolve over the course of.
I think too, like they're asking about how to set double refeeds up, but I've actually had someone where they couldn't even adhere to the refeeds. It was almost like a trigger.
Yeah, that's a good point.
And the adherence is like kind of like just out the window. And now we're like, they were just so abundant. It's like it turns into binges. So it just basically erases all progress that happened during the week. So sometimes if you think like the weekly total weekly calories, right? So it's like just take the refeeds and disperse it across all days. So you're still like, in a sense, their adherence might be a little bit better for this specific person. So there's no triggers. So that's another way to kind of set it up, instead of like not scheduling refeeds at all.
Mm-hmm. That's a good one. So it's like, what's the goal for the week? And then based on that, what is this person going to do best with? Right. 5 low, 2 high, or just 7 slightly higher days?
And it might start that way. Like, okay, and maybe it's like down the road, like, fatigue starts to build. well, maybe, okay, now we do need to throw a refeed or two in there, but you have to be strategic, because if this person has adherence problems to it, you have to find ways around that. Because again, you're going to get, like, no matter, depending on how long that diet is too, like if you're extending it out weeks and weeks and weeks, in theory, the fatigue level can get really escalated. So it's about trying to how to manage this person in their environment to make sure their adherence is as good as it can be. So it might take more than just like the 2 refeeds a week. There might be a plethora of different strategies to take.
Do you ever get paranoid that doing less will result in potentially worse results, despite logic telling you otherwise? I tend to get carried away with prep, and I associate suffering with progress.
Brad should start this one off, because we can go back to, what year was it? 2008 and watch his YouTube videos. And
No, 2009.
I don't think I've ever seen anybody suffer as much as this man.
Yeah, I always back then equated suffering to progress. And yeah, I found out that working smarter is better than working harder. But yeah, I mean, it takes experience, because you've kind of mentioned this before, when you're dieting and there's a level of suffering that is kind of like acceptable and is actually making progress. Like I've seen you kind of say, yeah, I know it's working right now,
Yeah, I mean, it's not going to feel like sunshines and rainbows.
Exactly.
There's going to be moments where it's unpleasant. But I mean, if you're like you ready to pass out,
or you're living that way for like days and weeks and months, you're actually backsliding doing something like that. And I can kind of attest to that through, those days in 2008.
But like in the gym, like this is like most people, like let's say they're doing 20 sets, and then like, okay, they go from 20 down to 15 or something like that. That's where they have a little bit of a freak out.
They're going to backslide.
How do you like with your athletes, like when you drop volume, let's say, how do you kind of, because it always comes up, that insecurity, like, am I going to progress at the same rate, or am I going to see regression? Like, how do you
get them
converse
to get
with them
and to sell that? Yeah. Yeah. And a lot of times, because those are almost always athletes that are dieting. And I'm like, if we're only giving you, I use your supply and demand all the time. If we're only supplying you with so much fuel, there's no way we can demand it to perform on a reduced amount of supply. And so if we're going to bring supply down, we're going to have to bring demand down. We've got to scale it and match it. You were doing 20 sets a week on this many calories. Now we're at this many calories. You can't just bring down those calories and expect the performance on that level of volume to be maintained. You've got to scale it. You got to bring it down in order to be able to get the most performance out of those sets. And you're actually not backsliding if you think about it, because you're still matching things, and plus you're getting smaller. So now you're not the same person you were when you were doing 20 sets. You're 5 kilos less. You're 10 kilos less.
Most of the time, they try to maintain that same volume. And then basically, if they're starting to generate more and more fatigue, they can't keep that performance up. They can't even maintain it. Now the performance starts to drop down.
Correct.
So they're actually losing, volume by doing that.
Correct.
So if they just, in a sense, reset that baseline, the fatigue goes down. They're more energetic. Now all of a sudden, from that new baseline, I could actually add 5 more pounds on the bar, or I can do one more rep.
There's a lot of ways to offset that volume that just came down, that is not as fatigue generating as just keeping the volume the same all the way through, where you're not supplying.
So I always ask them, like, well, how does atrophy occur? Mm-hmm. And it's like, no training at all. I wish Eric is here, because he can tell me exactly how long it would probably take. But I would estimate it like 3, 4, 5 weeks. So you're still training, and especially if it's still intent, your muscle isn't going to go anywhere. And again, you reset the baseline, performance goes up. You have that, like you talked about, that supply and demand is more in tune. It's more in balance. So that's kind of been my experience with my athletes. I've been doing this for 10 years with prep athletes. Just recognizing, like, it's common sense. Like, they're deep into a prep, they're tired. Why would I increase their volume or maintain it if they could barely even manage it? Common sense tells me like lower it down or increase food or a combination of the two. And it doesn't have to be constant. Like you push and pull. You push and pull. So all you're really trying to do is manage fatigue.
Yeah. And I mean, like I said, there's acceptable levels of suffering, and you are going to have to suffer to a certain extent, but you don't want to suffer all the time, and you got to kind of pick your spots. Is now a good time to suffer? Well, you know what? Everything is in life is good. So I can dig a little bit harder, but if stress levels are high, your dog died and you sound like a Western, sad song, and
I
that's
don't
not a
listen.
time
I
to
don't
dig.
listen to country, Brad, so I don't know about that.
Well,
but-
then you can dig all the time.
All right. What about Steve? What about you? Because you work with that people that like dieting and all that. So everybody has a breaking point, right?
Yeah. And I don't know. I have three big thoughts that have been building, and the first one I want to hear after your guys' thoughts on it once I kind of hit the three. But I know for me to get out of that suffering equals better like mindset came through like observing people who weren't suffering as much making better progress.
Right.
Like that's what finally broke it for me, because I used to have that mindset.
I'm glad
and
I could do
started
that for you,
seeing
Steve.
people. You were definitely an influence for sure. But it was actually seeing people get better results who like weren't going through that suffering. That's what broke it for me. When it comes to like, I guess working with my clients, they're the group who reach out, who want to back off. We typically will do baby steps. And then once they see that going from 20 to 15 doesn't do anything negative, we just like slowly taper the other way. That's
You
the
get
way
the
I do
buy-in
that.
that way.
Whether it's decreasing training volume or increasing calories, increasing carbs, increasing fat, if those are the things they were scared of, slowly like bringing that stuff in or taking that stuff out, seeing that nothing bad is going to happen is what I typically do. If they're coming to me with the mindset where they don't want to go there yet, they want to stay at 20, but like I think the 15, using your example, like the 15 sets would be better, I will try to build their trust through something else. So it's like, let's say we're working on both nutrition and the training. I'll let them keep their training the way that is, and I'll try to build their trust to the nutrition side of stuff. And then as they see results there and they trust me more, now they'll be more likely to try my idea with bringing the training volume down. But I would love to go back to my first thing and say, because we were all in that mindset, what broke you guys? Because it sounds like that was what this question was actually about, is this person associates suffering with progress. We were all there at one point. Now none of us are there anymore. So what got you guys out of that mindset?
Can I go? These guys, like Brad, Eric, Alberto, because I was like going ham on the intensity. Like even through contest prep, doing like Mincer's HIIT, like going to failure and beyond when I'm like 7% body fat, and then just be totally just trashed after that. And these guys, once I met them, they were kind of like, they were seeing how I was doing things. Then they were like, hey, why don't we try doing this or try doing that? And it was scary. Like, well, wait a second. I'm a pro bodybuilder. The way I've been doing it's been working. Why are you guys trying to change me? So it's like I had to learn to let go of my walls, like just drop the walls down. And it was kind of baby steps, because it wasn't like I did everything they said all at once. It was like, I remember Berto like, why are you eating chicken, brown rice, and broccoli all the time? Hey, let's do this flexible dieting thing. I didn't want to do it. Like it literally, like I remember trying it for a day or two, and I was like, I got frustrated because it was just so just out there for me. And I just told myself, no, just stick with it, give it a week, 2 weeks. And eventually, I started getting the hang of it. And then, like you said, Steve, it was like nothing bad happened. I had a Pop-Tart and nothing bad happened. I didn't gain weight, So things like that kind of just reassured me, and I started building more confidence with it. And it made me open up to the other ideas they had. I was more like, there wasn't as many walls or a defense to it. Like Eric's like, hey, why don't we do a little more volume and not do as much intensity? Okay, let me try that. And, nothing bad happened. Actually improved. Over time I started seeing more and more improvements. Fast forward 2 years later, retain 10 more pounds of muscle getting on stage and just transformed my physique. And I was like, holy crap. It was like opened my world up to just a whole slew of approaches. So again, it's kind of like you said, it's like just baby stepping it, and like they basically had to kind of break me down a little bit to get that trust, and I'm glad they did.
How about you, Brad?
Yeah, because I never really had like one moment in time where it's like, aha. It was basically baby steps, and it was like this evolution. It's like when I dieted, there was no high days. It was just, eternal deficit, and then I was like, oh, this guy's having high days, and he's got a lot more muscle than I do, and he's just as lean, maybe I need to have a high day in there. And then pretty soon it was like, oh, well, you know what? He's having 2 high days, and sure, the other days kind of stink, but he's got 2 high days in there, and he's looking good. And then, oh, we had a deload week. We brought volume way down, and we didn't shrink, and the muscle didn't go away. In fact, really, the performance was really pretty good during that deload week, So it's just like these, like you said, these little baby steps, these little epiphanies that I started associating with, working smarter and not harder, and realizing that, that suffering, while necessary in certain spots, better progress is made when you kind of pick those shots a little bit, and you're kind of strategic.
It's like that push and pull.
Yeah, about your suffering and when it happens.
I've been using a lot lately is looking at other sports and talking with my athletes about other sports and how they do things. Like you look at baseball as a perfect example, like starting pitchers. You don't see a starting pitcher trying to throw 100 miles an hour every single pitch. One, they're not going to have the same control. They're going to have control over those pitches. They're going to be all over the place. Their arms are going to fatigue, and they're going to be a little more at risk for injury. So, a baseball manager recognizes like, okay, there's a specific amount of pitch count this pitcher can last. Like maybe it's 80 pitches, 90 pitches, whatever. And they're in rotations. Like starting pitchers don't pitch every single game because they're not going to have the same type of performance every time because of the fatigue factor. So they rotate every 4 or 5 days. So they learn how to control velocity, placement of the ball, pitch counts, all things that we do in principle as bodybuilders to make sure that we're elevating our performance, getting the most out of ourselves, and we're efficient over time. We can sustain good longevity. So I look at other sports, and it's like, it's the same principles that we should be applying as bodybuilders. You could look at any sport, same thing with basketball. I even researched a little bit, and I'm sure there's probably some errors here and there, but I looked up like teams that play back-to-back games, the winning percentage, losing percentages. Teams that played every other day or every third day had higher winning percentages than teams that played back-to-backs. Of course, you got to take into consideration some teams are better than others, but just in general, like it kind of makes sense. Like the teams that are more rested, they're going to perform better. So, I could go on and on about other sports. It's the same principles and concepts. But for us as bodybuilders, like because we're so eager for progress and we think the outwork mentality, it's like Brad said, you got to learn how to work smarter and more efficient.
And I think that's what's unique about bodybuilding is you said like basketball or baseball, like if an athlete is doing that, they're going through a program or a system
right,
where they have other people supervising them and like giving them guidance and helping them to figure out their fatigue and recovery and manage all that. Where most bodybuilders are self-taught.
Yep.
And
at least I was.
Yeah. I think we all basically start that way. And so there's no overseeing of what we're doing. All we have is what we pick up on. And a lot of the stuff is popular is that like that intensity. And
like a boxer, you see a boxer go in there and throw wild punches, hard as he can, just throw wild punches. The smart boxer is going to take a step back, throw a quick jab and a hard right, and drop them. They're more technical, more skilled. They know how to pace. It's the same principles again. So that's something that I've liked the last 3, 4, 5 years. I've really been paying more attention to other sports. Let's say more so than the bodybuilding stuff. And I've been able to apply it pretty successfully across my bodybuilding athletes.
Well, and you talked, a word that you said that really stuck out was longevity.
Because I don't know anything about that.
Because it doesn't matter if you're dieting hard to get lean, or if you're grinding yourself into the ground in the gym trying to grow, are you going to be able to suffer like that for your entire lifting career, your entire bodybuilding career? No, you're not going to be able to suffer like that all the time. So your whole career, you're going to have to make sure that you're balancing suffering with actual, basically periods where you're enjoying your life and making your bodybuilding journey sustainable, because that's ultimately what's going to, that time under tension, time being decades. And
I remember vividly being in Eric's house, and I remember saying, like, I'm 38, I've been training for 20 something years. I'm not going to make any more progress. I'm done, and Berto looked at me and goes, dude, you're just getting started. What are you talking about? So it's like, again, like, they had to break me down, baby step me.
Yeah.
And I mean, if I would have kept the same approach, I mean, maybe I could still be doing it, but the big question mark is, would I been able to be as optimal as I've been the last 10 years?
Yeah.
I don't know. Probably not.
What's going on, 3DMJers? Eric Helms here. Thanks for listening to our podcast. I just want to take a second to tell you about MASS, Monthly Applications in Strength Sport. This is a monthly research review that I put out with Greg Nuckols, Dr. Mike Zerdos, and Dr. Eric Trexler. We cover the most up-to-date, peer-reviewed research in the world of strength and physique sport that's directly relevant to your practice as a coach or athlete. We provide our reviews in written format, but also, since you enjoy our podcast, audio roundtable reviews where we discuss the research in depth. Finally, we also do video concept reviews where we cover a broader topic in video format for your learning. For fitness professionals, you can take quizzes on MASS content and earn continuing education credits in most of the biggest certifying bodies in the fitness industry. If you want to sign up and get a subscription, head over to 3dmusclejourney.com and click on the Products tab. Thank you for your time, and thank you for listening.